In the last movie, we saw some problems that can occur with grid snapping in 3D. If we've got the Move tool active and we're snapping in 3D to grid points, if we move something in the top view, for example, it's going to be sent down to an elevation of 0. All right, so let's work around that. I'll undo that with Control Z. There are two ways to work around this: 2.5D mode and or axis constraints. Let's look at 2.5D mode first. Click and hold the Snaps button to get the flyout and choose 2.5D mode. This is going to move the snap cursor in the 2D space of the screen itself, also known as the picture plane. So just to give you a little bit of background information, rendering, or the display of an image, is the projection of the 3D scene into the flat space of the image, in this case a viewport. 2.5D mode is going to snap the cursor to the screen projection of something. It's not going to snap to the thing itself. That means that, for example, if we right-click over in the top view and move this object around, we're snapping to points in X and Y, but we're not snapping to the XY ground plane itself. In an ortho view, in 2.5D mode, the snap tool doesn't change the value of the third axis. It only changes the values of the axes shown here in the axis tripod on the lower left. This indicates the orientation of the world coordinate system, and we see X and Y, X pointing to the right and Y pointing upward towards the top of the screen. And Z is just a letter Z. Z is pointing towards and away from our current viewpoint. And when we snap in 2.5D mode, we're snapping in these two dimensions, X and Y, in the top view, but not in the third dimension, not in Z. The snap cursor maintains a constant elevation if we move an object in 2.5D mode in the top view. All right, I'll undo that movement with Control Z. The other way to work around this issue is with axis constraints. And axis constraints are disabled by default. If we, for example, try to move in the y-axis by clicking on the y-axis of the transform gizmo, we're able to actually move in both x and y because axis constraints are turned off by default for the snap tool. I'll undo that with Control Z. Once again, right-click on any magnet icon, and in the Grid and Snap Settings dialog, go to Options, and under Translation, turn on Enable Axis Constraints, and close that dialog. Now in the top view, if I click and drag on that y-axis of the transform gizmo, I'm only able to move in the y direction of the world. This is another way to prevent those unexpected problems that we saw in 3D snap mode. It also makes it much easier to move objects in precise distances, because when we click and drag here, we can move to any point along this grid line, and that's not going to change the snapping. Whereas if axis constraints were off, we would always be moving in more than one axis, and that could result in unintended consequences. All right, so I'll undo that with Control Z a couple times, and now we're ready to actually make some clones of all of these crossbeams. So I'll drag a selection rectangle around all of those, and maybe dolly back a little bit with Control, Alt, and middle mouse button, and hold down the Shift key, and make some duplicates. Just drag that down. And if we drag it too far, we'll actually go off the grid and snapping won't happen anymore. So we may have to do this in two motions. So we can make those duplicates and choose Instance, so they'll all be exact copies. And if we change one, we'll change them all. So click OK. And then we'll make our changes here in the left view. Middle mouse drag and snap that into position. That's how to use 2.5D snaps and axis constraints to precisely move objects in 3 dimensions.